Charlotte Mason Enrichment is thrilled to bring you another incredible summer conference. This year, our theme is building strong families through habits of the home. Nothing of value and purpose happens on accident. Strong families must be built with intentionality, effort, and consistency. That sounds like a habit to me. Charlotte said that the habits of the child produce the character of the man. She also said that there is nothing which we do which is important as forming habits, because after all, it is that which makes the difference between one person and another. The habits that we keep are a big deal, and they are an important part of the work that we do as parents and home educators. So at the conference, we're going to be looking at habits in 4 different categories. The first one is the habits of the heart, the habits of the mother, the habits of the child, the habits of the schoolroom, and we're also going to talk about homemaking, because that's a really big part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I have invited Miss Cindy Rollins, Amy Farquhar, Rachel Bird, Mary Salas, and Melissa Stefani to help us unpack these amazing topics. These ladies are phenomenal, and they have so much wisdom. They have so much expertise to speak to these topics. And so I know that we are going to learn and grow a lot from each session and each speaker. So the dates of the conference are July 18th and 19th. The 18th is a VIP session at night. And then the 19th is a full day where we are going to just be committed to learning and growing and having some fun while we're at it. So you can join us in person in Tulsa, or you can join us virtually for the entirety of the day. Be sure to go to charlottemasonenrichment.com/conference. That's charlottemasonenrichment.com/conference for more information and to get your tickets. And please tell all your CM mamas about this event, and I can't wait to see you there. Well, hello, and welcome to the Charlotte Mason Enrichment Podcast. My name is Elise Thompson, and I'm the host, and I'm so grateful that you are tuning in to today's episode. I am joined with Miss Beth from Little World Wanderers, and we are going to be talking today all about mother education. You know, here at the Charlotte Mason Enrichment Podcast, our whole desire is to encourage, to equip you, and to enrich your lives as a Charlotte Mason home educator. And I am so excited to have Beth on the podcast so that you could feel enriched today. So welcome, Beth, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so for those of you who have not had the pleasure of meeting Beth on the internet, Beth is over on Instagram at Little World Wanderers, and she herself is a homeschooling mom, Charlotte Mason homeschooling mom of 2, living in Colorado area, and have been doing this from the beginning, implementing Charlotte Mason's principles since she started educating her children. And so, Beth, tell us a little bit more just about yourself, your family, whatever you want to tell us.
Yeah, so we live on the Front Range of Colorado, just south of Denver. And I have 2 children. I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. And we started homeschooling way back when my daughter, this part of me is not Charlotte Mason, but when my daughter was, her first day of school picture is when she is 21 months old, and she is holding a balloon and a sign that says first day of tot school.
Oh, that's cute.
I laminated all the things, and we did so many themed activities that I changed out every week for my literal infant.
That's awesome.
And then I found Charlotte Mason, and I started doing all of that.
Okay, so you were obviously really eager to just dive into learning with your little girl. That is so fun. I love it. So how did you even come to find out about Charlotte Mason?
Yeah, so when my daughter was born, a friend of mine introduced me to the Read Aloud Revival podcast.
Mhm.
So I listened to the podcast constantly. I was already reading her books. I actually we did our first read aloud when she was like not even a week old while I was nursing. I used to read a book out loud to her. So I read The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, and
Oh,
then
that's so great.
we just kind of worked through multiple books. And every time I nursed her, I would open up a book and I would read out loud to her.
That's so
Um,
cool.
so at some point, Sarah Mackenzie said something about Charlotte Mason, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And around the same time, a friend of mine gave me a copy of For the Children's Sake, and I read the book. And we had already been doing tot school, but I read the book and realized, like, oh, this is the type of education I want her to have.
Wow.
So we started implementing certain aspects of Charlotte Mason as much as you can do with like a tiny human being. um, she was a little bit more than two, maybe 2.5 at the time, and we started doing nature walks and all sorts of things, and just being more intentional in that way.
That's awesome. I think that's really cool. And I know like I did a whole podcast episode on like waiting till 6 to start formal lessons, but those are the types of things that you should do when you're waiting to start those formal lessons is just being very intentional about reading aloud to them and spending time in nature and just building those habits. So that is really awesome. Were you homeschooled as a kid?
I was not, no. So I
Okay.
grew up in all aspects of the schooling system.
Mhm.
So I went to private school for a time, and then I went to public school for a time. And my dad was military. So I went to the Department of Defense schools overseas for a time.
Okay. So you got to experience it all. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
And I'm a former teacher.
Okay.
So
That makes sense because I was like, you were just like ready to teach somebody
I,
something.
we knew we couldn't afford preschool. So I was
Okay.
like, we can do preschool at home. And
Yeah.
I really did preschool at home for the
I
first little
love
bit.
that. That is so fun. I bet your daughter like loves to read now because
She
you
loves
started
to
her
read.
so young. That
Yeah.
is awesome. That is so fun. Okay, so the reason we are gathered here today, we're talking about mother's education. And that's something that you're really passionate about. And so I've found that if somebody is passionate about something, if they create something, there's usually a backstory to why they're passionate about it. And you actually do have a story of how you came to have a love for this. So we would love to hear it.
Yes. So I was diagnosed oh goodness, about 10 years ago. My daughter was a toddler, so right around the time I was top schooling her. I was also diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called Graves' disease. And Graves' disease is a condition that causes hyperthyroidism. Um, so we went through what we believed at the time were the best medical steps to treat it. Um, and that resulted in me having surgery to remove my thyroid. So we went through that whole process. We decided to grow our family. We went through infertility, just secondary infertility, and grew our family through adoption. And all of that kind of leads up to about 3 years ago. Um, I started experiencing severe chronic pain.
Mm,
Um, my autoimmune condition had relapsed, so Graves' disease had come back even without the thyroid, and it was causing a major hormonal imbalance. So my thyroid levels were very, very high, which
mm,
was causing a lot of nerve pain. So for literally, when I know sometimes people say like a season of time, but literally for the winter season,
oh,
for a solid 12 weeks, I was in debilitating chronic pain. I had neuropathy in my hands. I had nerve pain that extended across my face and down my spine. And I
mm,
basically spent the entire 12 weeks on the couch, like huddled up under a blanket, um, physically unable to do a lot of stuff. And my body is still recovering in some ways from that, even 3 years later.
mm,
But during that time, because I was going through multiple rounds of medical testing, trying to work through what doctors thought this potentially could be. Um, I was doing whatever I could to like disassociate. And a lot of that came down to like, I was on my phone way too much. I was just trying to disconnect and disassociate, and that didn't help. So
Right.
from the couch, I'm still homeschooling my children. We were doing like whatever we possibly could, but I still needed to bring in aspects of things to like look forward to because it was a very bleak time for me.
Yes.
So I read a book called This Too Shall Last, and it talks about chronic illness and chronic pain or infertility or things like what do you do when it persists. And
Mm,
then I read a book called Holy Huga, and then I started pulling in other books. So I picked up like a science book and a history book, and I started implementing aspects of my daughter's education in my own life.
mm,
So I got a book of poetry that I hadn't read, and I tried to be very intentional about nature journaling. And through giving myself basically a Charlotte Mason education, and I'm constantly reading through the Charlotte Mason volumes. I pretty much always have one going. So I was also reading her words too.
mhm,
Um, I realized that there was just so many aspects and pieces of beauty that I could bring into my day, even when I was feeling very, very sick. Um, but the thing that solidified it for me is during this time, I was also having an MRI done. And the hospital where I had the MRI didn't provide any like headphones or anything. So you're just and it
yeah.
was on my brain and my spine. So
Oh, wow.
they put the cage over my face, and then they put the IV in, and they like pushed me back into the little MRI machine or big MRI machine, and they said, if you move, the scans are useless. Like we're gonna have to start over. And here's the panic button. But if you have to get out, like we have to start over. And I was like, I can't. It was like the only way out is through. So
Mm,
I closed my eyes because I started having all of the feelings of panic of like, I have to get out of here. I cannot do this. There's nothing in this world that can make me get through this
mm,
well. And
yeah.
I closed my eyes and I started imagining all of the paintings that I had done with my daughter in artist study.
Wow.
And when Charlotte Mason says your children should have these paintings hung on the halls of their imagination that they can just reference, I literally I thought of a painting and I did an artist study. And
Wow.
I remembered, Starry Night and how the yellows and the blues looked and the brushwork. And then I went to all of these different paintings that I had studied with my daughter. And by the time I had gotten through the halls of my imagination, the MRI was over. I know.
Wow.
So I went home, and as soon as I was feeling better, I blogged about it
Yeah.
because it's like if this works for me, like maybe it could encourage somebody else. And I titled the blog like a picture study in an MRI machine. And that solidified it for me of like a living education isn't just giving you like knowledge. It
Mhm.
it's giving anchor points too. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's huge. When you say anchor points, like, what did that look like for you?
it looked like one, um, it looked like when I started to kind of Charlotte Mason talks about change your thoughts. So when I started to like ruminate on I'm feeling pain behind my eye, I
Mhm.
could take a step back and think instead of thinking about that pain, like maybe I'm going to recite a poem to myself in my
Mhm.
head. Maybe I'm going to sing a hymn to myself.
Mhm.
Maybe I will think about what bird is outside or notice something out and literally just change my thoughts.
Oh.
Um, so about 2 years ago, because my thyroid levels hadn't been regulated and we still didn't know what was causing all of the pain, they've since diagnosed me with fibromyalgia. And the Graves' disease is going into remission, but it started attacking the vision in my right eye. So I started progressively losing my vision. And that was another thing to work through of, okay, I'm trying to instill this life-giving education for my children and myself. And if the possibility is that I lose my sight, like, does a life well lived still exist, or still, how does that look? And thankfully, there are Charlotte Mason moms who live and have these beautiful, wonderful educations and lives, also managing chronic pain and illnesses and vision loss. It's like, okay, if this is what the Lord is calling me to, then part of it was like, I just want to soak up as much beauty as I can.
Wow, that's really powerful. It's powerful that you had already begun this beautiful journey with your daughter, and you probably had no idea how life-changing and life-giving it would be, even for you, in a time that probably didn't feel very life-giving.
Yes.
Life-changing, but it didn't feel very life-giving.
Yeah,
But the good stuff was already on the inside of you.
exactly. Yeah.
That is so powerful. So that's how you've become passionate about moms having their own Charlotte Mason education, or really just education.
Yeah.
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 So how do you practically like implement something like that? Because now that's kind of like your life's message, right? Is for other moms to cultivate their own education.
Yeah. I think it's so important for moms, especially like young moms who are in the trenches, because we are
Mm,
limited on time. When you
yeah.
have young children and you're currently homeschooling, or you have a baby who's up all night, or you have a teenager who's up all night, like, it it's easy to say that I don't have time to cultivate this rich life for my own sake,
Mm,
but you know, we aren't meant to put our personhood on hold to go through life's trials or to go through the good moments. We are meant to live fully in every phase of our life. So sometimes it means scaling back certain things where, maybe you're not reading 100 books a year.
yeah.
Maybe you're reading 5 books, but
Mm,
those 5 books are truly life giving. And I left it downstairs and I wish I hadn't. In the story of Charlotte Mason, it talks about like sometimes when we feel like we're disconnected or spiritually lacking, it just means that we need to fuel ourselves with more spiritual ideas. Like we need something new. So I know when I was going through like truly the trenches of my chronic pain, like I needed something new to give
mhm.
fuel life in me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's cool you found that, and, you mentioned looking through your phone and you're just like, this is not gonna
no,
it's not gonna
there's
cut it."
There's only, like, so many cat memes you can look at before you're just like, "Okay, like, Lord, come be
Yeah,
Lord," 'cause
yeah. This isn't doing it.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Man, that's so powerful, Beth. Thank you for sharing your testimony and how you kind of came to, um, becoming passionate about a mother's education. So I would love to know, because I'm sure others are curious, what does that look like for you, like on a daily or weekly basis?
Yeah, so I structure my own education on a weekly basis. I basically, if I require my daughter, and my son isn't compulsory schooling, but once he is, I will have the same requirements for my own sake.
Mm,
Um, if I require her to do it, I expect that I will also do it. So that doesn't mean like I'm counting her books as my education. Those are her books. I still read them. Either I read them with her or I pre-read them. But if it's required that she will read a science book, I have a science book. Um, I have a history book. I read poetry. I read through Plutarch. I've come to really love Plutarch.
that's awesome.
I try to keep a modern fiction and a classical fiction in rotation. Um, and then I'm always reading, I mean, outside of my normal quiet devotional time where I'm reading through the Bible and then doing a devotional or something, I try to keep some home education, either reading through Charlotte Mason or a book that's related to the Charlotte Mason method, because that is what I do with homeschooling. So I count that as like professional development.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And then every day I just rotate through those books. So I try to read poetry every day. I'm reading Shakespeare sonnets right now.
Nice.
And it is really fun when you don't have to analyze it, when you can just read beautiful poetry and you don't have
Yeah.
to sit here and like, I mean, I'm starting to understand iambic pentameter just because I'm reading the sonnets. So,
Yeah, that's
um,
awesome.
and then I will pick like maybe a chapter from a history book or a chapter from a science book. And then it takes like 30 minutes a day to
Wow.
work through that. And then when my daughter is doing her notebooking, I sit down with her and I notebook too. So
Wow.
we nature journal together. And now it feels more like a community, like we are learning together.
Mm, yeah, that's
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, I started keeping written narrations because it helps me grow an empathy for her.
No, that's so good. Okay, so like guys, this is totally doable. Like when you break it down like that and you say, okay, I have like several books, but I'm only spending like 30 minutes a day. That feels so doable. I guarantee we all are on our phones for at least 30 minutes doing something mindless. Like
And when
you're
you
gonna tell me you're
through
not.
Mason's schedule, like she constantly had a book in rotation in the evenings that she would read. She would read like Sir Walter Scott in the evenings. And while I have not grown an affinity for Sir Walter Scott yet, one day I may perhaps. And I, with the classical literature too, I go back to books that I read in high school. So I've read through several books I read in high school to decide like, did I actually not like this? Or was was the joy of this book kind of taken out of me because I was expected to do a pop quiz on it every Tuesday? Or
Yeah. You're just reading it to get a grade.
exactly, yeah. So
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That is like that's doable. Like, I feel like that's doable because I think we do sometimes, at least for me, I won't say everybody, but at least for me, it's like I see people post their like Goodreads and they like have already read like 20 books. And I'm like, I'm just not gonna live up to it. But if I can commit to reading 30 minutes a day because that's one thing that's so great about a lot of the books that our kids read is they're big books, but they work on them for like 30 plus weeks throughout the year. And it's like, well, if we just keep taking those small bites every single day, we're going to make progress.
exactly. And you can, I mean, if I finish a book of poetry, I just get a new book of poetry. Like I might not schedule, but some books I will look at and I'll say, this is going to take me 18 to 20 weeks to read. And that's okay. Like this
Yeah.
is, it's we're slowly working our way through it, but also we're supposed to our kids are slowly working their way through books so they can like sit with those ideas and they can make
Mhm.
these science of relations
Yeah.
across everything they read. So when we start doing that for ourselves, it's like, oh, if I'm not, binging this book on audio at 2x speed, actually,
Guilty.
me too, all the time. I have, I, so along with my mother's education list, I do have my list of like garbage books that I'm like,
Your twaddle.
yeah, my twaddle. I'm like, is this book really necessary? I'm like, it's probably not, but I'm gonna like,
Yeah.
it's enjoyable. It's my armchair read.
Yeah. It's a little guilty pleasure. It's like our
Exactly.
chocolate. It's fine. Well, one thing I thought was really cool that you said when we were talking before we actually started recording is you said something about like when you start doing your own education, it really helps you to believe that much more in the method.
Yes. Yeah. So when we started Charlotte Mason, there's a lot in there that I'm like, I did not believe that this was an actual like academic, even even the method itself sometimes. When I first got started, I was like, I don't see how this is rigorous or how this is truly academic. And
Mm.
this is a point that comes up often in various homeschool circles or podcasts where some people will say a Charlotte Mason education is not academically rigorous.
Wow.
And when I first started coming from the public school systems, even as a teacher, it was like, yeah, rigor looks like, worksheets and proof of learning and test scores. And you don't get that with Charlotte Mason, but you get a narration, and that's proof of learning. So when I started narrating, I realized like one, it actually is difficult for
Mhm.
some people. For some kids, they can just narrate all day long and, you know, are totally fine. I have one who's like that, and I have one who is not like that. And um, so, and we'll see how it continues to pan out as they get older. But for my own self, like I have read a chapter of a book and I started to try to narrate it. I'm like, I don't know. Like I don't know. No idea what I just read. So it's like, let me go back. You're not supposed to go back, but it's like, let me go back by
Really?
paragraph. And
Yeah.
it really started training my own habit of attention where like
Wow.
sometimes I'm listening to an audiobook, but like my brain is elsewhere, or
Mhm.
I'm reading a book and like the TV's on in the background, or the
Mhm.
kids are talking to me, and it's just like, oh, I actually can't multitask. Like my brain isn't really made to split that way. So like I do need to give focused attention. But then I started looking at like copy work. So for common placing, like it's really just advanced copy work.
Mhm.
You start that when they're little. That way they can commonplace. Dictation ends up being like in college, if they need to take notes, like if you practice dictation with your kids starting in year 4, which I think is the year it's recommended, like they'll be able to take sermon notes or notes in a lecture hall. And
Mhm.
it's not going to be that difficult. They might have to shorthand it, like they may need to learn how to shorthand it, but
Mhm.
they will be able to pay attention and narrate it back or write it down, or even, you know, to be able to hear what somebody else has said and then process and synthesize and narrate it back. Like there's so much learning that goes into it. And I didn't realize that when I first started the method until I
Mhm.
implemented it. And I was like,
Wow.
oh, that's what it is.
Wow. So it proved itself to you
Definitely.
as you did it.
I
Well, it makes
mean,
yeah.
naturalist nature journal. That's what,
Mhm.
like, scientists nature journal. They observe, whatever in nature, and then they write down their notes of their observations. And then we look at that and we say, hey, we know about chimpanzees because Jane Goodall journaled it. And this is
Mm.
legitimate, education. It's like,
Wow.
oh, watching a caterpillar and writing down your observations is a legitimate way to learn about a caterpillar.
Wow. Yeah,
You don't need a
absolutely.
worksheet.
Yeah. You've learned it firsthand, you've seen it.
Exactly. I mean, you can, if you really want to do a worksheet, you can, but you don't have to. You could just watch the caterpillar.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, sometimes it just takes the joy out of the actual learning because you're not thinking about what you're learning, you're just thinking about answering and getting it right. So, man, that's really, really cool. And it makes me excited to like go pick out some good books and start my own apart from what I'm reading with into my kids. So I mean I'm learning so much with them, but I think it would be really exciting to, have my own things that I'm reading and then be able to narrate to them and tell them. Feel
Like,
like they'd be proud of me.
she likes asking me, she's like, so what's that book about? I'm like, well, let me tell you. Some
Yeah, how
books,
much time do you have?
yeah. And I mean, my husband, I narrate to him. I'm like, let me tell you about what I just read.
Oh, my husband's in school and he does that to me every day after he gets out. And I used to be like, why are you having to tell me a thing? And then it clicked. I was like, he's narrating what he learned. Like, that's great. I will listen. So, okay. So, Beth, people like me and maybe other listeners are like, okay, this is great, but where do I start? Could you give us some recommendations for
Yes.
the different subjects
So
that we can pick up?
I'm if you are doing Charlotte Mason and you feel like notebooking is like a little bit hard, or you haven't wrapped your mind around all of the different notebooking, like commonplace and all of that, I really love this book, The Living Page. And it's by Laurie yeah, Bestvater. Um, and it goes through, I mean, everything, books of centuries, nature journaling, all of it. Your nature notebook lists where you write down what flower you saw and what season or like months you saw that flower in. Um, this is a great book for, I mean, your kids, but also for yourself to like implement these aspects.
That's
Um,
great.
I recently read, so I started reading a book. Actually, no, I did finish it. It's called Here's Looking at Euclid, and it's about the history of math. And
Oh,
I
wow.
totally geeked out over this book. And I was talking to my friend, and I was like, I read this book, and it's so amazing. And I used to be a math teacher,
Okay.
so I I loved this book. And she said, "Oh, that's awesome. Have you read A Mathematical Mystery Tour by A.K. Dewdney?" I said, "No."
Nice.
It is also a history of math book, and I've commonplaced so many things, and I mean, it's going through like mathematicians and math concepts, and this is one area with homeschooling where you you see like the social media things of like, why do we even have to know the Pythagorean theorem? Or every tax season, there's a joke that goes around that's like, oh, I'm so glad I learned about hypotenuse during hypotenuse season. And so it's like, yes, but do you know why you should know about the Pythagorean theorem? Like, not only is this an idea that was revealed to, like, the Lord ordained Pythagoras to learn, like, discover this theorem, and it's been living for, you know, thousands of years.
Yeah.
Like,
Wow.
Euclid wrote a geometry book in ancient times that we
Wow.
still use today.
Hmm.
So it's like these
Wow.
concepts are living, and they're worthy of knowing because they are ideas. It's worth
Yeah.
knowing ideas. Also know taxes, but like you don't have to learn taxes at the expense of learning these other worthy mathematical ideas. So
Wow. That's
this is a
awesome.
great math history book.
Yeah.
Um, I really liked the Sand County Almanac
Okay.
um, by Aldo Leopold for nature study. This is
Okay.
it's just a naturalist's observations and sketches from his home area, and it's a nice book where you can say like nature study can start in your backyard. Like you
Oh, that's
literally can just look at what flowers are blooming around your area. You don't
mhm.
even have to go somewhere where there are parrots. You can just like notice the birds. You should learn your backyard birds, and it's really fun to do that.
That's awesome.
And then a science book that I recommend is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Um, and this is by Rebecca Skloot. Um, it is the story of Henrietta Lacks and the cell line that was developed from her cervical cancer.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so it goes into some harder things of the mistreatment of her in the medical world, and all of that. Like her cells were taken without permission from her family, and it is the most prevalent cell line in history. Now it is still being cultivated and used today.
Wow.
It's incredible, both in like it's just incredible, like in a positive and negative sense of that word, what
Hmm.
she contributed to science and medical history
Hmm.
without even being credited to it.
Wow.
Um, so it's a very compelling story. I view it as an incredibly living book. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
That it was in a year 12 for
yeah,
those who Ambleside. It's a
yeah.
year 12 read.
So I label all of my Ambleside books I read on the spine what year, so I can quickly like pull them
Yeah.
from the shelves. So this is year 12 of Ambleside.
That's very cool. Thank you for those recommendations. We will put those in the show notes for anybody who wants to grab them because hey, it always helpful when somebody can give you a recommendation of a good book. So man, Bethany Ann, Beth, thank you so much for just sharing your passion about mother's culture. I know you have inspired me. If no one else is inspired, I am inspired to have a rotation of living books that I'm going through apart from my kids. And before we end, you actually have like a book club of moms that are going through living books together and then discussing them every month. Is that right?
Yeah, so every season I put together a mother's education seasonal guide, and we work through 6 books over the 12 weeks. Um, but each month, so it's 3 months, we will have one focus book. So we just got finished reading a history book called Dinosaurs at the Dinner Party, and it's the history of paleontology and its impact on the Victorian world. And there was a lot of really good conversations about it. Next month in February, we'll be reading a book called Hamnet, and it's a fictional tale um, of Shakespeare's son, Hamnet, and how that impacted him writing Hamlet. And then we'll be reading a nature study book. But we also do artist study together. So on Zoom, we will practice artist study and narrate the artist. We share our narrations and our commonplace quotes from that, the last 2 weeks of reading. And then we also share like what handicrafts we've done. So it's part like mother culture, mother's education, part Charlotte Mason show and tell.
I love that.
Sometimes you want to say like, hey, look at the
Yes.
look at this that I painted a goose.
Yeah.
And
That's
or I
awesome.
noticed this new bird, and we get to talk about that.
Awesome. I love that. That is so fun. Little mom show and tell. Well, we'll put also a link for that if anybody wants to join Beth and the other ladies in her mother culture, mother education group. We'll put a link to that as well. Well, this has been just such a beautiful and such a rich conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And man, I say it every week that Charlotte mentioned that the only true education is self-education. And I feel like you just took that to the next level for us all today. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yay, awesome. Well, that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you all for tuning in. And like I say every week, the only true education is self-education. So we're never going to stop learning and we're never going to stop growing. And I will see you all next week. Have a great one.